In just 5 short chapters of Exodus, we get one of the most intense, high-stakes dramas in the entire Bible. It's a story of divine plans being laid out on a holy mountain, while at the very same time, a complete catastrophe unfolds down in the valley. It's all about failure, forgiveness, and what it really means to be in a relationship with God. It's a story that honestly peels back the curtain on the heart of God and the struggle of humanity. So let's jump right in.
So, here's how we're going to trace this incredible arc. First, we'll look at God's perfect plan. Then, we'll dive right into the chaos of the people's rebellion. We'll see Moses' desperate plea, witness God's absolutely stunning mercy, and finally, see how that grace completely transforms an entire community.
All right, let's start at the top, literally. Our story begins at the peak of Mount Sinai. Moses has been up there with God for 40 days, and he's getting the final, super detailed instructions for building the tabernacle. The place where God's actual presence would dwell, right in the middle of his people.
Now, for a project this important, you can't just put out a help wanted ad, right? You need the right people. And God doesn't leave this to chance. He calls out 2 men by name, Bezalel and Oholiab. He appoints them as the lead artisans. And this tells us something huge right away. God doesn't just give a vision. He provides the exact people with the specific, spirit-filled skills to make it happen. This isn't just a job opening. It's a divine calling.
And check out where their talent comes from. The text says God filled him with the Spirit of God. So all this amazing craftsmanship, working with gold, cutting precious stones, carving wood, it wasn't just raw talent. No, it was a supernatural gift. Their work itself was a form of worship, which shows us that even our practical, hands-on skills can be anointed for a holy purpose.
So right in the middle of all these construction blueprints, God hits the pause button. He inserts a command that seems, kind of random. Hey, don't forget to keep the Sabbath. But the placement here is everything. He's teaching a massive lesson. Building my house is important, but it's not more important than the relationship the house is for. See, the goal isn't the building, the goal is communion with Him. And the Sabbath, that's the constant sign of that relationship.
So the big takeaway from this first chapter is really twofold. 1, God equips the people He calls for the work He wants done. And 2, He literally builds sacred rest, a rhythm of stopping, right into the fabric of our relationship with Him. It's about work and worship, always hand in hand.
Okay, brace yourselves, because while this perfect, divine blueprint is being laid out on the mountain, down in the camp below, things are about to go completely off the rails. I mean, the contrast between what's happening up there and what's happening down here, it's absolutely jarring. And you know how it all starts, with a little bit of impatience. Moses has been gone for what feels like forever. Fear and doubt start to creep in, and pretty soon the crowd's anxiety just boils over. They corner Aaron, the high priest, and he just caves. In a moment of total weakness, he gives in. And the irony is just sickening. They take their gold, the very stuff that represented their freedom from Egypt, and they melt it down to forge an idol.
Listen to what they say. This isn't just making a statue. It's a total case of spiritual amnesia. They look at this lifeless calf, probably a symbol of power they picked up from their time in Egypt, and they say, "This is the God who rescued us." I mean, wow. In one sentence, they completely smash the first 2 commandments they just agreed to, trading their real rescuer for a cheap copy.
Let's just put this side by side because you really can't get a starker contrast. Up on the mountain, you have God Himself writing His eternal law on stone with His own finger, and down below, you have people melting their earrings to make a temporary, man-made replacement. It's a clear choice between divine revelation and human rebellion.
So when Moses finally comes down and sees this, his anger is righteous, and it is swift. The consequences are incredibly severe. He rallies anyone still loyal to God, and the tribe of Levi steps up to purge this evil from the camp. About 3,000 men die that day. It's brutal, but it shows just how seriously God takes this kind of betrayal.
The lesson from this chapter is, it's heavy, and it's timeless. It shows us just how fast impatience and fear can poison our faith and lead to a total rejection of God. And it's a powerful reminder that sin is never free. It always has a cost. It shatters our relationship with God and brings real devastation into our lives.
So after this absolute disaster, the relationship between God and Israel is just in pieces. It's totally broken. God tells Moses, look, go on, lead the people to the promised land. But then He adds this terrifying condition, but I'm not going with you. He says He'll send an angel to guide them, but His personal presence would be gone.
And this is Moses' shining moment. He gets something so crucial here. He understands that the promised land, without God's presence, is just an empty piece of land. The whole point of who they were, their entire identity, was their relationship with God. So he basically draws a line in the sand and says, if you're not going, we're not going. We won't move an inch without you.
Now you might be wondering, how could Moses be so bold? Who talks to God like that? Well, this verse right here is the key. Their relationship wasn't just formal, it was deeply intimate. He wasn't just God's servant, he was God's friend. And that deep personal connection is what gave him the courage to stand in the gap and plead for the very people who had betrayed them all. So the crucial point of this whole intense negotiation is this: God's presence is what truly matters. It's the one thing that separates God's people from everyone else on the planet. It's the ultimate treasure, worth way more than land or wealth or even safety. And because of Moses' passionate plea, God relents. He agrees. And what happens next is just breathtaking. Instead of walking away, God invites Moses back up the mountain to renew the covenant. This right here is the climax of our whole story, a moment of pure, unadulterated grace.
And this path to renewal is so deliberate, so symbolic. First, Moses has to carve out new stone tablets, a physical picture of a fresh start. Then, God himself comes down to meet him again. But before he rewrites the law, God does something absolutely astonishing. He proclaims his own name. He reveals his very character to Moses.
Seriously, let this sink in. This is one of the most important moments in all of Scripture. This is God defining himself. And what's the first thing he says? He doesn't lead with his power or his holiness, even though he is both of those things. No, he leads with mercy, grace, patience, and forgiveness. Now, justice is part of his character, for sure, but his heart, his first declaration about who he is one of overwhelming mercy.
This tells us everything about God's fundamental nature. When he's faced with the ultimate betrayal, his first instinct isn't just to punish, it's to restore. He is the God of the second chance. His grace is so much bigger than our biggest failures. The covenant isn't renewed because the people earned it, it's renewed simply because of who he is.
So the big question is, how does this encounter with such radical mercy actually change things down on the ground? Well, Moses comes down from the mountain, and get this, his face is literally glowing from being in God's presence, and he gathers everybody. After such a massive failure and such undeserved grace, their response is going to be the true test. So Moses brings up the tabernacle project again. You know, the very thing they were supposed to be working on before the whole golden calf disaster. He puts out the call for contributions. Gold, silver, fine linens, precious stones, all the materials they needed to build a dwelling place for God.
And the people's response, this is the proof of their transformation. This wasn't a tax. It wasn't a command they had to obey. The text is so specific here, it says the offering came from every person whose heart was stirred and whose spirit was made willing. This is the tangible evidence of a changed heart. The very same gold they willingly gave to build an idol, they now joyfully and voluntarily give for the glory of God.
And that really brings our whole story full circle, leaving us with this one last thought. The story that started with a divine plan and crashed into idolatry ends with a people transformed by mercy. Their hearts, which were once impatient and full of fear, are now stirred and willing. And it shows us that after our greatest failures, grace doesn't just forgive us, it changes us. It frees us to offer everything we have back to God, not because we have to, but because we want to, with a willing heart.